Aliens is written and directed by James Cameron and stars Sigourney Weaver, Michael Biehn, Paul Reiser, Lance Henriksen, Carrie Henn, Bill Paxton, William Hope, and Jeanette Goldstein. And Aliens takes place 57 years after the events of the first film. Ellen Ripley wakes up from stasis and tries to warn people about what her crew found on LV-426. No one believes her, of course, and she finds herself accompanying a group of Marines back to the very same planet when they discover that they've lost contact with one of the colonies living there. Now, if Alien is maybe the greatest science fiction horror movie ever made, Aliens, plural, is maybe the greatest science fiction action film ever made. What James Cameron did with this film is just completely unprecedented. This is probably my favorite sequel ever, just because of the balance of the things it copies sort of from the first film and the things that it kind of comes up with on the fly that are completely fresh and new. Aliens contains some of the best practical effects ever seen on film. It's again one of the most suspenseful action films ever made, and it solidifies Sigourney Weaver's character of Ripley as an icon in cinema. Aliens continues the first film's tradition of just being mesmerizing to look at. While Adrian Biddle's cinematography doesn't aim for the same type of gothic horror that the first film did so well, for the most part it does still maintain the use of darkness and the use of tight angles with some truly chilling shots, especially this one shot where a xenomorph comes out of the water in front of someone, and it just looks really scary. But what truly takes a big step up in this movie are the practical effects, and I'm not saying that the practical effects in the first Alien were bad by any means, because of course that's still one of the best looking movies ever made, but here they really amp it up in terms of technology, and that's what James Cameron's really known for. The sets here are definitely a lot more varied, and what I like is that the backgrounds aren't really just, static. Instead, every single element in the environment seems to play a part in the action. It feels sort of like a video game in the sense that the sense of place is very involved with the characters, with the viewer, and I don't think that there's a single alien in this movie that's CGI. I could be wrong, don't quote me on that, but every single xenomorph you see in this movie, I'm pretty sure was made out of actual props, and they're operated by puppetry. And I know it's so common to hear critics say that it looked real, it felt real and stuff like that, but when you watch Aliens it really does feel like these are animals that they just happen to film on set. And what's great about what they do with the xenomorphs here is that they're not just hiding in the shadows and grabbing people like in the first movie. Here they're crawling all over the place, on the walls, on the ceiling, they're jumping at people. So it really enhances just how dangerous they are. The other thing that becomes more dangerous in Aliens are the face huggers. In the first movie you knew that they could cause damage, but here it gets really scary just being in the same room with them. And then of course you've got the Queen, which is maybe my favorite practical effect in a movie of all time, because it's just this gigantic beast that's operated by like 15 people, and every time you see the Queen alien on screen in this movie, it's all in camera, it's all practical effects, and it really makes a difference. It feels like it's there. Alien still has a lot of tense silences like in the first movie, but of course the sound design has been sort of revamped to fit a war film. The gunfire, the explosions sound great, and just the nerve-wracking sound of this xenomorph army coming for these Marines. In fact, it's because of this sound that makes me wish that I was alive in 1986 to watch this movie in a cinema, because there's a certain moment when you first hear all the xenomorphs sort of waking up and stirring, and I can just imagine the entire audience sitting forward in their seats and just thinking, oh my god, this is it. It just sounded so great and scary. And James Horner takes over the reins here from Jerry Goldsmith. He adds a really memorable theme to Aliens that kind of has a more military tone to it. And people always talk about how Aliens is so different from the first movie, but the secret here that Cameron pulled off really well is that he actually does a lot of what Ridley Scott did in the original movie. It's just that he recontextualizes these techniques to fit an action film. For example, he again keeps the xenomorphs mostly in darkness throughout the entire film, except this time, because it's an action film and you want to waste these bastards, the darkness and the suspense is less scary and more thrilling and exciting. And when you do see these creatures, it's less horror and it's just more of awe. You're in awe of how these creatures look, especially when you see the Queen for the first time. And for me, James Cameron proves with Aliens that action movies can be art. A lot of people think of action films as being defined by explosions and gunfire and whatnot, but I think James Cameron proves here that action filmmaking is all about forward momentum with a high focus on causality. The idea that all these tiny little elements will contribute to the bigger picture, and every single movement really adds to the completion of the mission. And you really feel this urgency all throughout Aliens, especially in like the last 40 minutes or so of this movie. It's just completely insane. It's so suspenseful. The action is incredible, and the relentlessness in Aliens is thanks to the editing by Ray Lovejoy. It's extremely well paced for an action film. Even when you watch the extended special edition, you really just feel that urgency. Again, whenever the Xenomorphs aren't there, it's really suspenseful. When they are there, it's really frantic. Because the movie lets you know early on that these Marines, despite their technology, they're completely overpowered. So all the tactics that they've learned get thrown out the window, and whenever there are aliens on screen, they just kind of fire blindly, and it's chaos, and the movie really shows it very well. And what this movie does differently from the original film is that this film is told from Ripley's point of view from the very beginning, instead of like an ensemble piece. But even when the film cuts to other characters in this movie, everything always leads back to Ripley. On this mission, of course, some people kind of get separated from other people, and you get different points of view, but these are all multiple threads on the same wavelength. It's still one straightforward mission. And again, since we brought her up, let's talk about Ripley. Let's talk about Sigourney Weaver, who actually got an Oscar nomination for this film, and that's crazy. Like, that stuff never happens anymore. And what's great about her performance here is that she's definitely still the same character from the first film. She still has that fear, that intelligence, that determination, but you also get to see a very vulnerable side to her in her sort of maternal relationship with the character of Newt, who's played by Carrie Henn. And Carrie Henn in this movie, like, her accent is kind of weird, but she's like the cutest thing, so it doesn't matter. And she's actually really good here for a child actress. You care for her immediately. Michael Biehn has this air of authority that he had in the first Terminator as Kyle Reese. Paul Reiser in this movie is great. He's sleazy as hell. Lance Henriksen is awesome as the android Bishop, and Bill Paxton, bless his soul, is extremely entertaining in this film. He really brings the comedic relief. His timing is impeccable. But again, it would be too easy to just call Aliens a straightforward science fiction movie, because there is a lot more going on beneath the surface. First of all, Aliens was definitely influenced by the Vietnam War, which is in line with the first film's ideas that despite all of our technological advancements, it doesn't make up for the fact that we're imperfect human beings. And I feel like a lot of modern viewers forget that Aliens was like one of the OG feminist narratives, but not necessarily because the character of Ripley kicks ass, and she kicks a lot of ass in this movie, but because Ripley retains all of her femininity throughout the movie, and that maternal instinct, even while she's showing strength. By comparison, if you look at the character played by Jeanette Goldstein, Vasquez, she's a female Marine, but she's very masculine in comparison. However, Ripley overcomes these aliens and really kind of fights them through her being a woman. If you really want to read into it, you know how the aliens are supposed to be like phallic symbols, so she, triumphs over them, but without becoming a quote-unquote phallic symbol herself. I'm not making any of this stuff up. If you read up online, there's a lot of analysis, feminist and otherwise, about aliens, and there's just so much to dig into in this film that I think a lot of people forget about. In summary, again, Aliens I think is a spectacular film. I personally think it's James Cameron's best movie. Again, when you have that conversation of what is the best James Cameron film, a lot of people will say Terminator 2. For me, it's Aliens, like, by far. And when you ask people what their favorite alien film is, it's usually between Alien and Aliens. I don't really like that question because it feels like whatever you don't pick, suddenly it seems like that movie has some sort of flaw. But I want to make it clear that I think these two movies are practically flawless. And if you know me personally, you'll know that my taste is usually more aimed towards, movies like Alien, the first one. But I'm actually gonna say I like Aliens a little bit more, just because I love what James Cameron is able to do with an action film. Alright, so those are my thoughts on Aliens. Have you guys seen it? What do you think about it? Whatever you guys think, whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.